I was standing at my 8-year-old son's casket when my Uncle Larry grabbed the microphone and announced to 200 grieving people that God was ending a cursed bloodline. But what happened next turned my son's funeral into something no one would ever forget. My name is Melora, and 3 days ago, I buried my son, Ashwin. He was 8 years old, loved space more than anything, and died in my arms after 2 days of agony that no doctor could explain. If you think you know where this story is going, you're wrong. Because while I stood there in that funeral home, drowning in grief, a 9-year-old boy would reveal something that would send my uncle to prison for the rest of his life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the people in this story, because you need to understand who they were before that horrible day changed everything. Ashwin was my whole world. Brown eyes that sparkled when he talked about planets, messy black hair that stuck up no matter how much I smoothed it down, and a smile that could make anyone believe in goodness again. He wasn't just my son, he was my redemption after a marriage that nearly broke me. When his father walked out on us 6 years ago, Ashwin grabbed my hand and said, "It's okay, Mom. We don't need him. We have each other and the whole universe." He was 2 years old and already wiser than most adults I knew. Uncle Larry was my father's older brother, 58 years old, and a deacon at Houston's largest Baptist church. He had this way of entering a room that made everyone stand a little straighter, speak a little quieter. Salt and pepper beard always perfectly trimmed, suits that cost more than my monthly rent, and eyes that seemed to look right through you, searching for sin. He'd never forgiven me for divorcing Terrence, even after I showed him the bruises. "Marriage is sacred, Melora," he'd said. "You work through difficulties with prayer, not lawyers." Then there was Deacon, Ashwin's best friend from next door. 9 years old, quiet, where Ashwin was loud, cautious, where Ashwin was brave. They'd met 2 years ago when Deacon's family moved in, and it was like watching two puzzle pieces click together. Deacon wore thick glasses that made his eyes look enormous, and he had this habit of pushing them up his nose when he was thinking hard about something. His real name was actually Deacon, not a nickname, which Ashwin thought was the coolest thing ever. "He's named after church people, and I'm named after a tree," Ashwin would laugh. "We're like a weird superhero team." The boys were inseparable. Every day after school, they'd race to our backyard where they'd built what they called their space station out of cardboard boxes and Christmas lights. They had elaborate plans to become astronauts together, had even written NASA letters asking if best friends could be on the same space mission. NASA actually wrote back saying friendship was important for long space journeys. Ashwin framed that letter and hung it above his bed. My parents, Judith and Harold, lived across town in the same house where I grew up. Mom was a retired teacher who still wore her reading glasses on a chain around her neck and kept tissues tucked in her sleeve. Dad was quieter, a mechanic who'd rather fix things than talk about feelings, but who'd shown up every single Sunday since the divorce to take Ashwin to the park. They were good people caught between their love for me and their fear of Larry, who controlled the family with his position in the church and his judgments that felt like prophecies. The extended family was complicated. Aunt Bethany, Larry's wife, smiled too much and spoke too little. Their 3 kids, my cousins Roger, Patricia, and little Samuel, treated Larry like he was one step below God himself. There were others, too. Great aunts who whispered about my divorce at every family gathering, cousins who'd stopped inviting us to birthday parties, and church members who looked at Ashwin with pity, like he was marked by my sins. But in our little duplex on Maple Street, none of that mattered. Ashwin had covered his bedroom ceiling with glow-in-the-dark stars in actual constellation patterns. He'd spent 3 weeks researching to get them exactly right. "Mom, look," he'd say every night, pointing upward. "That's Orion." "He's a hunter. And that's Cassiopeia. She was a queen. And that bright one there? That's not a constellation, but I put it there for you. It's the mom star, the brightest one in my universe." Those are the people you need to remember, because in a few minutes, I'm going to tell you how my son went from perfectly healthy to dead in 48 hours. I'm going to tell you about Uncle Larry's speech at the funeral that made my blood run cold. And I'm going to tell you how a 9-year-old boy with thick glasses and a NASA pin became the bravest person in a room full of adults. The morning Ashwin died, he looked at me with those beautiful brown eyes and said, "Mom, Tell Deacon he was the best space brother ever." I promised I would, thinking he was just scared. I had no idea those words would become evidence in a murder trial. This is the story of how my family's darkest day became the moment truth finally won. And it all started with Uncle Larry picking up that microphone, his voice echoing through the funeral home like thunder, while my baby boy lay in a casket decorated with paper stars that Deacon had folded, one for every planet they'd planned to visit together. The week before Ashwin died was perfect. I know people say that about times before tragedy strikes, but it really was. Monday morning, he'd scored his first home run in Little League. I can still see him rounding third base, his face lit up with disbelief and joy, his teammate Deacon jumping up and down in the dugout. Tuesday, he'd aced his solar system project, coming home with a gold star and his teacher's note saying he'd taught the class facts even she didn't know. Wednesday, we'd had tacos, his favorite, and he'd laughed so hard at my terrible jokes that milk came out his nose. Thursday, we'd started planning his 9th birthday party just 2 weeks away. He wanted a NASA theme, of course. "Mom, can we get real astronaut ice cream?" he'd asked, sitting at our small kitchen table with party supply catalogs spread everywhere. "And can Deacon's cake be chocolate while mine's vanilla?" That way we both get our favorites. That was Ashwin, always thinking about others. Even his birthday had to include his best friend's preferences. Our duplex on Maple Street wasn't much to look at from the outside. Faded blue siding, a front door that stuck in humid weather, and a patch of yard just big enough for the boys' cardboard space station. But inside, it was our sanctuary. Every wall held Ashwin's artwork, from finger paintings he'd made in preschool to his recent detailed drawings of rocket ships. The refrigerator was covered in his tests, all A's and B's, and photos from our adventures. The two of us at the Houston Space Center, at Galveston Beach, at the park feeding ducks. I worked as a pharmacy technician at Houston General, 4 10-hour shifts that meant 3-day weekends with my son. The pay wasn't great, but my supervisor, Mrs. Chen, always let me adjust my schedule for Ashwin's school events. She'd been through a divorce too, and understood what it meant to be the only parent who shows up. My parents came by every Sunday for dinner. Mom would bring her famous pot roast, and Dad would fix whatever was broken that week while Ashwin followed him around with his toy toolbox. They never said it out loud, but I knew they were trying to make up for the father Ashwin didn't have. Dad taught him to throw a baseball, change a tire, and shake hands firm but not too hard. Mom taught him manners, helped with homework, and snuck him extra cookies when she thought I wasn't looking. Uncle Larry's visits were different. He'd show up unannounced, usually when he knew I was at work, and Ashwin would be home with the teenage babysitter Keela. He'd give Keela $20 to take a break and spend an hour lecturing Ashwin about sin and salvation. I'd confronted him about it once, and he'd said, "Someone needs to ensure that boy's soul is saved, since you're clearly not concerned about it." "He's 8 years old," I'd argued. "He doesn't need to be terrified of hell." "The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, Melora. You'd know that if you still came to church." I'd stopped going to Larry's church after the divorce. Too many whispers, too many looks, too many people telling me I should have tried harder or prayed more. Instead, Ashwin and I found a small community church where the pastor, Reverend Williams, taught about love more than judgment. Ashwin loved Sunday school there because they let him ask all his questions, even the weird ones like whether aliens needed Jesus too. The Friday before he died, Larry had called me at work. "I'm concerned about Ashwin," he'd said. "I've been having visions." "What kind of visions?" I'd asked, already exhausted by wherever this was going. "Dark ones." "The boy needs prayer, real prayer." "Let me come by this weekend." "We have plans this weekend," I'd lied. "Besides, Ashwin is fine. He's healthy, happy, and loved." "Love without discipline is worthless," Larry had said. "That boy is growing up without proper guidance. Mark my words, Melora, God won't let this continue forever." I'd hung up on him, something I'd never done before. My hands were shaking as I went back to counting pills. Mrs. Chen had noticed and asked if I was okay. "Family stuff," I'd said, and she'd nodded knowingly. That Friday night, Ashwin and Deacon had a sleepover at our house. They'd built a blanket fort in the living room and watched a documentary about the International Space Station. I'd made them popcorn and listened to them plan their future. "When we're astronauts," Deacon had said, adjusting his glasses, "we'll discover a new planet. And we'll name it Planet Best Friend," Ashwin had added. "No one can go there unless they're nice to everyone." "Even aliens?" Deacon asked. "Especially aliens," Ashwin confirmed. "Mom, you can visit whenever you want. We'll build you a purple house there because that's your favorite color." Saturday morning, they'd played outside until lunch. Then Deacon's mom had taken them to the library. Ashwin had checked out 6 books about space and one about dogs because he was trying to convince me we needed a puppy. "Astronauts probably have dogs, Mom, for when they come back to Earth and need a friend who doesn't care that they've been gone." Saturday night was normal. Bath time, story time, prayers. Ashwin always prayed the same way. "God, thank you for Mom, for Deacon, for Grandma and Grandpa, and for space. Please help everyone be happy tomorrow. And if you could make Uncle Larry smile more, that would be good too. He always looks sad even when he's being mean. Amen." Sunday morning, I woke to Ashwin throwing up. By Sunday night, he was in the hospital. By Tuesday morning, he was gone. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. What matters is that you understand we were happy. We were normal. We were a family of 2 who'd figured out how to be complete. And then, in less than 48 hours, everything ended. The funeral home smelled like lilies and wood polish. I sat in the front row, and my hands folded so tightly my knuckles turned white, staring at the impossibly small casket covered in white roses. Ashwin would have hated the flowers. "Why do people put dead things on dead people, Mom?" he would have asked. "Shouldn't they use something alive, like a plant that keeps growing?" But I hadn't been able to speak when the funeral director asked about arrangements. Mom had handled everything while I sat in Ashwin's room, holding his NASA letter. The service started at 10 in the morning. Pastor Williams from our church was supposed to be leading it, and he'd begun beautifully, talking about how Ashwin's curiosity about the universe reflected God's infinite creativity. He shared the story about Ashwin asking if God needed a spacesuit when he visited other planets, which actually made a few people laugh through their tears. Even I managed a small smile, remembering how serious Ashwin had been when he asked that question. My mother went next. She stood at the podium in her black dress, the one she'd worn to my father's mother's funeral 5 years ago, and spoke about her grandson with a steady voice that only cracked twice. "Ashwin taught me to look up," she said. "Every time he visited, he'd grab my hand and drag me outside to see the moon, or find Mars, or watch clouds that looked like rocket ships. Last month, he told me that when people die, they become stars. That's why there are so many, Grandma," he'd said. "All the people who ever lived are up there, watching us. So now when I look up, I know my grandson is the brightest star in the sky." Dad couldn't speak. He'd tried to stand when Mom finished, but his legs wouldn't work. He just shook his head and sat back down, tears running down his weathered face. I'd never seen my father cry before, not once in 32 years, and watching him broke something inside me that I didn't know could break any further. The funeral home was packed. Ashwin's entire class had come with their parents. His teacher, Miss Rodriguez, was sobbing quietly in the 3rd row. The Little League team sat together in their uniforms, Ashwin's jersey hanging on an empty chair between them. Deacon sat with his parents right behind them, wearing the suit he'd worn to his grandfather's funeral, the NASA pin Ashwin had given him fastened to his lapel. He hadn't spoken since Ashwin died, his mother had told me. Not one word. Neighbors filled the middle rows. Mrs. Patterson, who used to complain about the boys' noise until Ashwin brought her cookies we'd baked and asked about her cat. Mr. Nguyen, who'd taught Ashwin to count to 10 in Vietnamese. The Hendersons with their twin daughters who hero-worshipped Ashwin. People from my work, including Mrs. Chen, who'd closed the pharmacy for 2 hours so everyone could attend. And then there was family. They filled the left side of the room like a dark cloud. Aunt Bethany in the 2nd row with her children, all dressed in severe black, their faces composed in what Larry called appropriate mourning. Cousins who hadn't spoken to me since the divorce, great-aunts whispering behind their programs, and Uncle Larry in the aisle seat, his Bible in one hand, checking his phone with the other. Everything changed when Larry stood up. Pastor Williams had just asked if anyone else wanted to share memories when Larry strode to the podium with the confidence of someone who owned the room. He didn't ask permission. He just took the microphone from Pastor Williams, who stepped aside looking confused. "Family," Larry began, his deep voice filling the space, "we gather here in grief, yes, but also in recognition of God's mysterious ways." My mother grabbed my hand. I saw Dad's jaw tighten. "Young Ashwin was an innocent soul," Larry continued, "born into circumstances beyond his control, a broken home, a fractured family, a mother who chose her own desires over God's plan for marriage." The room grew uncomfortable. People shifted in their seats. Pastor Williams stepped forward, but Larry held up his hand. "Sometimes," Larry said, his voice rising like he was preaching to his congregation, "God must prune the tree to save it. Sometimes he must end one branch so that others might grow straight and true. This child's death, while tragic, is perhaps divine mercy, a bloodline corrupted by divorce, by defiance of God's will, by the sin of a mother who refused to submit to her husband's authority, refused to keep her sacred vows. Perhaps God, in his infinite wisdom, has chosen to end this cursed bloodline before it could spread further sin into the world." Someone gasped. "I think it was Miss Rodriguez." My mother stood up, but Dad pulled her back down. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Larry was using my son's funeral to preach about my divorce. "I loved this boy," Larry continued, and something about the way he said loved made my skin crawl. I tried to guide him, to save him from the path his mother set him on. But some seeds fall on rocky ground. Some children are born to be examples, not of how to live, but of what happens when we defy God's natural order. Aunt Bethany nodded, actually nodded. So did Cousin Roger and several of the great-aunts. They were agreeing that my 8-year-old son deserved to die because I got divorced from a man who broke my ribs. "This is a lesson for all of us," Larry proclaimed. "God's judgment may seem harsh, but it is always just. This boy's death should remind every woman here of the sanctity of marriage, every man of his God-given authority, and every child of the consequences of growing up in sin." The room was silent except for muffled crying. I finally found my voice, started to stand, my whole body shaking with rage and grief. But before I could speak, before I could scream at Larry to get away from my son's casket, a small figure stood up in the third row. It was Deacon, his thick glasses reflecting the overhead lights, his small hands clenched at his sides. He walked toward the podium with slow, deliberate steps, like he was carrying something heavy. Deacon stood there for a moment, this small boy in an oversized suit, looking up at Uncle Larry, who towered over him at the podium. The entire funeral home held its breath. Deacon's mother half rose from her seat, reaching for her son, but his father held her back, whispering something in her ear. Everyone watched as this 9-year-old boy, who hadn't spoken a word in 3 days, cleared his throat. "Uncle Larry," Deacon said, his voice surprisingly clear in the silent room, "should I tell everyone what you did the night before Ashwin died?" The color drained from Larry's face so fast I thought he might faint. His hand gripped the podium, knuckles white, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. "Child, you're grieving," Larry said, trying to recover his authoritative voice. "Sit down." "This isn't the time for children to speak." But Deacon didn't move. He pushed his glasses up his nose. That familiar gesture that Ashwin always said meant Deacon was about to say something important. "You just said God's judgment is always just. You said Ashwin died because of sin. But what if I saw something? What if I know something that everyone here needs to know?" My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. What was Deacon talking about? What had he seen? Larry stepped away from the podium, moving toward Deacon. "Young man, you're confused. Your friend's death has upset you. Your parents need to take you home." "No," Deacon said, taking a step backward but not retreating to his seat. "Ashwin was my best friend. My space brother. And you killed him." The gasps that filled the room were like a physical wave. People stood up. Someone dropped a hymnal. Aunt Bethany let out a sound like a wounded animal. My father was on his feet immediately, moving toward Larry, but Larry backed away, his hands raised. "This child is hysterical," Larry announced to the room. "He doesn't know what he's saying." "I was there," Deacon said, and now tears were streaming down his face, but his voice remained steady. "Friday night. I was in Ashwin's closet. We were playing hide and seek even though we were supposed to be in bed. Ms. Melora was in the shower. Keela was watching TV in the living room. You came in through the back door." The back door, the one I'd been meaning to fix because the lock didn't catch properly. The one Larry knew about because he'd offered to fix it himself just a month ago. Deacon continued, his words coming faster now. "You had something with you. A thermos. A blue one with a silver top. You went into Ashwin's room and woke him up. You told him you had special juice for him. Vitamin juice that would make him strong and smart for space. You said it was a secret that his mom wouldn't understand because she didn't believe in God's vitamins." I couldn't breathe. The room spun around me. My mother's arms were around me, holding me upright, but all I could see was Deacon's face, so young and so brave, telling this impossible story. "Ashwin didn't want to drink it," Deacon said. "He said it smelled funny, like the garage. But you told him that God wanted him to drink it, that if he loved his mom, he'd drink it and become the son she deserved. You said it would fix everything that was wrong, that it would make his bloodline pure." Pastor Williams had his phone out, I noticed distantly. He was calling someone. Several. People were recording on their phones. Larry was backing toward the exit, but Mr. Nguyen and 2 other men blocked his path. "He drank it because you scared him," Deacon continued, his voice breaking now. "You held his nose and made him drink all of it. Then you told him that if he said anything, God would punish his mom. You said the juice would make him sleep, and when he woke up, everything would be better. Then you left through the back door." "Lies!" Larry shouted, but his voice cracked. "This child is making up stories." "I stayed in the closet for another hour because I was so scared," Deacon said. Ashwin got back in bed and said his stomach hurt. By morning, he was throwing up. "I wanted to tell someone, but I was scared no one would believe me. I'm just a kid. You're a church leader." "But then you stood up there and said God killed him, and I knew I had to tell the truth. Ashwin would want me to tell the truth. My father had his phone out now too, and I could hear him saying police and funeral home and emergency. Someone in the back was already on the phone with 911. The funeral director appeared with 2 security guards, positioning themselves near the exits. Deacon looked directly at me then, his eyes huge behind his glasses. "I'm sorry, Ms. Melora." I should have come out of the closet. I should have stopped him. I should have told someone right away. But I was scared, and I didn't know the juice would hurt him. I thought it was really vitamins. "I'm so sorry." I broke away from my mother and ran to Deacon, dropping to my knees in front of him, pulling him into my arms. "You brave, brave boy," I said into his hair. "You just saved other children. You did the right thing. Ashwin would be so proud of you, so proud." Over Deacon's shoulder, I saw Larry try to push past Mr. Nguyen. "This is insane. You're believing the fantasies of a traumatized child. I was home that night with my family." "No, you weren't," a small voice said. It was Aunt Bethany, standing now, her face pale, but resolved. "You said you had a church meeting. You were gone from 7 to midnight. You came home and took a shower immediately, and you threw your clothes in the washer. I thought it was strange, but I never question you. God help me, I never question you." The sirens were audible now, growing closer. Larry made one more attempt to reach the door, but this time it was his own son, Roger, who stopped him. "Dad, what did you do?" Roger asked, his voice hollow. "What did you do to that little boy?" Larry looked around the room wildly at all these faces that had once respected him, feared him, followed him. "I was doing God's work," he said, and those 5 words sealed his fate. Someone had to stop the corruption from spreading. The police arrived then, 3 officers entering the funeral home with quiet authority. Deacon was still in my arms, his whole body shaking, as they read Larry his rights and led him away in handcuffs past his sons. Casket, past the flowers and the photos and all the testament to a life cut short. I heard him mutter, "It was supposed to look natural. It was supposed to be God's will." Deacon pulled back from my embrace and looked at me with those serious eyes. "Ms. Melora, there's something else. Ashwin wanted me to tell you something. Friday night, after Uncle Larry left, he called me over to his bed. He said his head felt funny and his stomach hurt, but he wanted me to know that if anything happened to him, you were the best mom in the whole universe. He said he loved you more than all the stars. I held that brave little boy and cried for my son, for the truth he'd revealed, for the horror of what had happened in our home while I stood under the shower, unaware that 20 feet away, my brother-in-law was poisoning my baby with antifreeze from a thermos, calling it God's vitamin while my son drank death because he trusted an adult who spoke of heaven. The funeral home erupted into chaos the moment the police took Larry away. People were crying, shouting, calling others on their phones. Aunt Bethany had collapsed into a chair, her children surrounding her with bewildered faces. But in the middle of all that noise and confusion, Detective Maria Santos arrived and took control. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice that somehow cut through everything else. "Everyone please remain seated," she announced. "This is now a crime scene. We'll need statements from several witnesses." She approached me first, where I still knelt with Deacon. "Ma'am, I'm very sorry for your loss." "Is this the boy who witnessed the incident?" I nodded, unable to speak. Deacon's parents had reached us by then, his mother crying, his father's face grim. Detective Santos knelt down to Deacon's level. "You did a very brave thing today," she told him. "Can you come with me and tell me everything you saw? Your parents can come too." As they led Deacon away to a quiet room, Detective Santos turned back to me. "We'll need to exhume your son's body immediately. If what the boy says is true, there will be evidence. Antifreeze poisoning is very detectable." "The hospital," I managed to say. "They said they couldn't figure out what was wrong." "His kidneys failed. They said it was some kind of rapid infection." "Antifreeze attacks the kidneys," she said gently. "Without knowing to look for it specifically, it can be missed. Especially if someone brings a child in already critical, claiming they just got sick suddenly." My mind was racing, putting pieces together. "Larry took out a life insurance policy," I said suddenly. "My mother mentioned it a few months ago. She thought it was strange, but Larry said it was to help with college expenses if anything happened to me." Detective Santos's expression darkened. "Do you know how much?" "No, but he's been having money problems." Bethany mentioned once that they were behind on their mortgage, but then suddenly they weren't. This was about 6 months ago. The detective made notes. "We'll look into all of that." Over the next hour, the truth unraveled like a horrible tapestry. Roger, Larry's own son, approached the police with shaking hands and told them his father had been researching poisoning methods on his computer. He said he was writing a murder mystery for the church newsletter. Roger said, his voice hollow. "I helped him research how long different poisons take to work. God forgive me, I helped him plan this." Aunt Bethany, once she started talking, couldn't stop. He'd been talking about Melora and Ashwin for months, saying they were a stain on the family name. He said God spoke to him in dreams, told him the bloodline needed to be cleansed. I thought it was just talk, his horrible, judgmental talk that I'd learned to tune out after 30 years of marriage. Then came the most chilling revelation. Little Samuel, Larry and Bethany's youngest, just 7 years old, approached Detective Santos with his iPad. "Daddy made me promise not to tell," he said, "but he has videos on here of Cousin Ashwin. Lots of them. The videos were surveillance footage. Larry had hidden cameras in our home months ago during his visits. Videos of Ashwin playing, sleeping, eating. Videos of me at vulnerable moments. Videos that showed him studying our routines, learning when we were most vulnerable. He knew I showered every Friday night at 8:30 while the boys played," I said, feeling sick. "He knew Keela would be distracted by her shows." He planned this for months. The medical examiner arrived and confirmed what we now all knew. The initial hospital tests had been looking for infections, not poisons. A specific test for ethylene glycol would have found it immediately. But no one thinks to test an 8-year-old for antifreeze poisoning when a hysterical mother brings him in, claiming sudden illness. The amount found in the thermos residue Deacon described would have been lethal within 48 to 72 hours without treatment, the medical examiner explained. Even with treatment, if not caught in the first few hours, the damage to the kidneys is irreversible. The child never had a chance. But the worst revelation came when police searched Larry's church office. They found journals dating back 2 years, filled with what he called divine revelations about cleansing family sins. Ashwin wasn't his first target. There were plans for others, including Bethany's sister's daughter, who was being raised by a single mother, and a teenage boy in his congregation whose parents had divorced. He had a list, Detective Santos told me privately. Your son's name was at the top, but there were 6 other children on it, all from broken homes, as he called them, all covered by insurance policies he'd taken out as the concerned church leader helping struggling families. The detective also found evidence of massive gambling debts. Larry owed almost $200,000 to dangerous people. The insurance policy on Ashwin was for $500,000, with Larry as the beneficiary since he'd claimed I was unstable and needed a backup guardian. He wasn't doing God's work, I said, the full horror hitting me. He was going to murder children to pay off gambling debts. And he started with your son because he genuinely believed his own twisted logic, Detective Santos said. The gambling debts were the trigger, but his journals show he'd been fantasizing about cleansing your family line since your divorce. The money problems just gave him an excuse to act on it. As the police continued their investigation, Pastor Williams approached me. Melora, I want you to know that the real church, the one that actually follows Christ's teachings, condemns this absolutely. Larry perverted faith to justify murder. That's not God. That's evil hiding behind God's name. By the end of that horrible day, the full scope was clear. Larry had murdered my son for money, using religion as his cover. He'd spent months planning, weeks preparing, and had nearly gotten away with it. If not for a brave 9-year-old boy hiding in a closet, playing hide-and-seek when he should have been in bed, Larry would have collected his blood money and moved on to the next child on his list. The prosecutor later told me Larry faced 7 counts of attempted murder for the other children on his list, 1 count of first-degree murder for Ashwin, insurance fraud, and dozens of other charges related to the surveillance equipment found in our home. He would never see freedom again. But that didn't bring my son back. It didn't undo the fact that while I stood in my shower, washing the day off, 20 feet away, my son was being murdered by a man who quoted scripture while pouring poison down his throat. It didn't change the fact that Ashwin died believing he was drinking special vitamins that would make his mother proud. Deacon later told me the last thing Ashwin said that night, after Larry left. Deacon, I don't think that was really vitamins. But if Uncle Larry says it'll help Mom be happy, then I hope it works. I just want her to be happy. My baby died thinking he was helping me. Larry had weaponized my son's love for me, turned it into the tool of his own destruction. That, more than anything else, was the evil of it. He'd made my son's pure heart complicit in his own murder. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Larry's lawyers tried to claim mental illness, religious delusion, anything to avoid the death penalty. But the evidence was overwhelming. The surveillance videos, the insurance policies, the journal entries, the list of future victims, and most damning of all, his own confession recorded on Roger's phone when he'd visited his father in jail. They were all going to hell anyway, Larry had said. At least this way, their deaths served a purpose. My debts would have destroyed my ministry. God's work required sacrifice. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. When they read the verdict, Larry stood up and pointed at me. That boy is in hell because of your sins, Melora. I was trying to save him. The bailiffs dragged him out while he screamed about divine justice. Aunt Bethany divorced him before the trial even started. She testified against him, revealing years of financial deception and psychological abuse we'd never known about. She discovered he'd taken out policies on their own children, too. I was living with a monster, she told me after her testimony, and I was too scared and too trained in submission to see it. The church expelled Larry posthumously from his deacon position and established the Ashwin Memorial Fund for children who've lost parents to violence. They raised $40,000 in the first month. Pastor Williams made sure every penny went to space camps and science programs for underprivileged kids. Your son wanted to explore the stars, he told me. Now his memory will help other children reach them. But the most extraordinary change came from Deacon. The trauma of that night, of keeping that terrible secret for even a few days, had damaged him deeply. His parents tried therapy, medications, everything, but he retreated further into himself. He stopped eating, stopped speaking again, stopped pushing his glasses up when he was thinking. 6 months after the funeral, his parents came to me with a request that shocked everyone. "He only seems calm when he's at your house," his mother said, "when he's in Ashwin's room with those glow-in-the-dark stars. We know this is a lot to ask, but would you consider taking him in? Just temporarily?" Temporarily became permanently. 2 years later, when Deacon's parents died in a car accident, a drunk driver hitting them on their anniversary dinner, I became his legal guardian. It wasn't even a question. Ashwin would have wanted me to take care of his space brother. We moved out of the duplex on Maple Street. Too many ghosts, too many memories of that night. We found a small house near NASA, with a backyard big enough for a real telescope. I kept Ashwin's room exactly as it was, those constellation stickers still glowing every night, but I also made Deacon his own space, painted deep blue with real NASA mission patches on the walls. Deacon is 14 now. He wears contacts instead of glasses, stands 5 inches taller than I do, and just got accepted into NASA's High School Aerospace Scholars Program. He still struggles with what he witnessed, still has nightmares where he tries to leave the closet but can't move. But he's learning to live with the trauma rather than be consumed by it. Every year on Ashwin's birthday, we don't have a memorial. Instead, we have what Deacon calls a launch day. We go to the Space Center and sponsor a child who couldn't otherwise afford to attend space camp. We've sent 12 kids so far, all from single-parent homes, all with dreams bigger than their circumstances. One of them, a girl named Marcus, who reminded me so much of Ashwin with her endless questions, just got a full scholarship to MIT. Last month, Deacon gave his valedictorian speech at his middle school graduation. He talked about courage, about speaking truth even when your voice shakes, about how sometimes the smallest person in the room has to be the bravest. He ended with this: "My best friend Ashwin taught me that we're all made of stardust, literally created from elements forged in dying stars. He said that meant we were all connected, all part of something bigger. He died because someone used God as an excuse for evil. But he lives on because someone else used truth as a weapon against that evil. Be the person who speaks up. Be the person who stands up, even if you're 9 years old and terrified, especially then." The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Uncle Larry still writes letters from prison, claiming he's found the true path to salvation. We don't read them. They go straight to the prosecutor's office as evidence of his continued delusions. Bethany and her children have rebuilt their lives, Roger becoming a counselor for abuse survivors, using his father's manipulation tactics to help others recognize the warning signs. And me? I went back to school, became a forensic pharmacist, specializing in poisoning cases. I've helped solve 16 murders in the last 3 years, most of them children poisoned by people they trusted. Each time I testify, I wear the NASA pin Ashwin gave me for my birthday, the one that says "World's Best Mom" with a little rocket ship. Some nights, when I tuck Deacon in, even though he's too old for tucking in, he asks me if I think Ashwin knows he saved those other kids on Larry's list. I tell him what I believe with my whole heart. Ashwin sees everything from up there among his stars. And he's proud of his space brother, who was brave enough to tell the truth when it mattered most. The truth is, evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it wears a church deacon's suit and quotes scripture while planning murder. Sometimes it takes out insurance policies and speaks of God's will while calculating profit from a child's death. But here's what I learned from all of this. Evil counts on silence. It counts on fear. It counts on people being too shocked, too scared, too small to speak up. It never counts on a 9-year-old boy with thick glasses and a NASA pin, hiding in a closet during a game of hide and seek, finding the courage to stand up at his best friend's funeral and say the words that change everything. Should I tell everyone what you did? Deacon saved 6 children's lives that day. But more than that, he proved that truth spoken by the smallest voice can bring down the tallest giant. He proved that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about speaking up even when your whole body shakes with fear. My son Ashwin wanted to explore space, to discover new worlds, to be the first kid to make friends with aliens. He never got that chance. But his death exposed a monster, saved innocent lives, and taught us all that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply telling the truth, no matter how much it costs you. Every night when I look at the stars, I see my son. And every morning when I see Deacon preparing for his future at NASA, I see my son's dream living on. Larry tried to end a bloodline. Instead, he created a legacy of justice, truth, and courage that will outlive us all. If you found this story meaningful, please like this video and share it. Someone in your life might need to hear that their voice matters, that speaking truth can save lives. Comment below if you've ever had to find courage in an impossible moment. And please subscribe to our channel for more stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Remember, you're never too small to make a difference. Sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truths.